10 years. For 10 years, I looked at the world through bars, and the world looked back at me with indifference. For 10 years, I breathed the stale air of a prison cell, saturated with the smells of despair and cheap disinfectant. For 10 years, I fell asleep to the accompaniment of other people's nightmares and woke up with the taste of bile in my mouth. And all that time, I held on to one thought, one image, one promise. To Ethan, my younger brother. The first breath of freedom was supposed to be a gulp of fresh air, but instead, it burned my lungs with the smell of diesel exhaust and wet asphalt. The prison gates screeched shut behind me, putting a definitive end to a chapter of my life written by another's hand. My old gym bag held my entire fortune. A pair of worn-out jeans, a faded T-shirt, a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, read to tatters, and a photograph of Amelia. Her smile, frozen in time, was both my anchor and a knife plunged into my very heart. Ethan was supposed to meet me. He swore it in every letter, filling pages with his ornate handwriting, promising a new life, a new start. "We'll get it all back, Liam," he wrote. "We'll be even stronger. You and me against the world, just like the good old days." But at the gates, only emptiness and autumn leaves swirling in the cold wind awaited me. No familiar black sedan, no face of the boy whose mistake had cost me my youth. An icy knot formed in my throat. Something was wrong. I wandered down the street, and the city crashed down on me with a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds and blinding lights. Where old brick houses once stood, faceless glass skyscrapers now soared. The faces of passers-by were illuminated by the ghostly light of newfangled gadgets I had never seen before. I felt like a museum exhibit accidentally thrown into the future. First, I went to Amelia's place, to our old apartment, where every corner held memories of a past happiness. The bus took me through unfamiliar streets, and a soulless voice announced stops with names that meant nothing to me. The building, thankfully, had survived, though it looked worn and tired. I climbed to the third floor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Her name was still on the mailbox. Amelia. So she hadn't married. A timid ray of hope pierced the gloom of my soul. I knocked. The door creaked open, and there she was. Amelia. 10 years had left a fine spiderweb of wrinkles on her face, but her eyes still shone with emerald green. The same unruly red hair was carelessly gathered in a bun. She looked at me without a hint of recognition, only a slight fear flickering in her gaze. "Can I help you?" Her voice sounded cold and distant. "Amelia," I rasped, barely recognizing my own voice. "It's me, Liam." The name hung in the air like a ghost I had carelessly summoned. Amelia's face, which had previously expressed only bewilderment, turned to stone. "You have the wrong address," she said. "Try and close the door." "No." I held the door with my hand. "Amelia, please." "It's me." For a moment, something like pity flickered in her eyes. "Liam is dead," she whispered. "He died in a car crash 10 years ago." The world swayed. The smoke, the asphalt, the unfamiliar city. It all merged into a nauseating blur. Dead? Me? And then I saw him, a shadow in the depths of the hallway. He was taller, broader in the shoulders, dressed in an expensive suit. He stepped into the light, and the ray of hope in my soul shattered into a million pieces. Ethan, my brother. He had his arm around Amelia's waist, and a wedding ring shone defiantly on his finger. And on his face was the very expression I remembered so well. The same one from that fateful night when the sirens wailed and our paths diverged forever. An expression of cold superiority and calculated pity. He didn't just steal my life, my love, my future. He erased me from memory, buried me alive. At that moment, standing on the threshold of someone else's life, with a dead man's name on my lips, I understood everything. The 10 years spent in a concrete box were nothing compared to the rotten swamp my family had become. The Count of Monte Cristo had been my teacher, my mentor, and now his lessons would become my creed. Revenge wasn't just a desire. It was the only thing I had left. My name is Liam, and my resurrection begins now. The first few days I spent in a fog, in cheap motels, with the taste of stale coffee in my mouth. I was a ghost in a world that had declared me dead, a shadow slinking along the edge of a life built on my bones. The $10,000 given to me upon release felt like a mockery, a pathetic payment for a stolen decade. But it was a start, and I knew how to start small. First, I decided to find out what kind of empire my brother had built. Our family name, our father's legacy, was once associated with honest work. We built houses that stood for centuries. Now it was a brand, E Corp, a soulless logo on gleaming skyscrapers. Ethan hadn't just inherited the family business. He had turned into a corporate monster whose tentacles reached into real estate, technology, and God knows what else. He built his kingdom on the foundation of my sacrifice. I spent my days in the public library, becoming a digital ghost in the labyrinths of the internet. I studied stock markets, acquisition schemes, the intricacies of corporate espionage. I spent my nights in the shadows, watching. I saw Ethan and Amelia leaving their luxurious penthouse, their laughter echoing falsely in the city's concrete jungle. I saw them at charity galas, with plastered smiles on their faces, the perfect couple. Amelia, my Amelia, in diamonds and designer dresses, with a carefully concealed emptiness in her eyes. The same emptiness I saw in the mirror every morning. The story of my death was a masterpiece of cruel fiction, a tragic car accident that cut a life short. A plaque with my name in the family crypt was the final, chilling touch. My parents, God rest their souls, had died believing their eldest son was gone. The thought caused me unbearable pain, a wound that festered and poisoned my entire being with its venom. Ethan didn't just erase me from the present. He rewrote the past. The plan for revenge was not born in a fit of rage. It was forged in the cold silence of my hotel room, step by step. I couldn't just destroy Ethan's empire. That would be too simple. I had to dismantle his life, brick by brick, just as he had dismantled mine. I would become the ghost he created, a whisper in the boardroom, a shadow in his home, a relentless, unseen force that would unravel the perfect tapestry of his life. My first move was small. E Corp was in the final stages of a merger with a Japanese tech firm. $1 billion deal, the jewel in Ethan's crown. I spent a portion of my money to buy a few shares in the Japanese company, enough to get a voice at the shareholders' meeting. And then I started digging. Years in prison had taught me patience and how to find the cracks in any system. For weeks, I studied financial reports, cross-referenced data, followed the digital breadcrumbs of corporate malfeasance. And I found it, a discrepancy, a rounding error, a single misplaced decimal point that hid a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Ethan was stealing, siphoning money from the deal, a classic case of corporate greed. He had been careless, arrogant. He had grown too comfortable in his kingdom, believing himself untouchable. I created an anonymous email address and sent a single cryptic message to the CEO of the Japanese firm. It contained a string of numbers, an account number in the Cayman Islands, and a simple question. Do you know where your money is going? The fallout was immediate. The merger was put on hold, an internal investigation was launched, and the press, like sharks to blood, began to circle. The E Corp name started appearing in headlines, no longer with praise, but with suspicion. I watched from the sidelines, a ghost in the machine, as the first crack appeared in the foundation of my brother's empire. Next, I turned to Amelia. This part of the plan tore at my soul, felt like a betrayal of the man I once was. But that man had died in a prison cell, and the one who remained was driven by a cold fire. I remembered her passion for art, the small, struggling gallery in the old part town she had dreamed of one day buying. A quick search revealed the gallery was on the brink of bankruptcy. I used another portion of my dwindling savings to create an anonymous trust that saved the gallery from ruin. The new owner, a reclusive collector who communicated only through his lawyer, had one condition. The gallery must hold a retrospective of a forgotten post-war artist. The artist Amelia had written her thesis on. The artist whose paintings we could talk about for hours, dreaming of a life surrounded by beauty. She took the bait. The exhibition became her project, a chance to reclaim a piece of the woman she was before she became Ethan's wife. I watched her through the gallery window, her face alight with a passion I hadn't seen in 10 years. She was so close, and yet so far away. On the opening night, I was there, hiding in the shadows across the street. Ethan was by her side, a strange smile on his face, clearly bored in a world of art and ideas. He was a man who understood the price of things, but not their value. As the evening wore on, I saw the cracks in their perfect facade. A sharp word, a dismissive gesture, an expression of weary resignation in Amelia's eyes. And then I made my move. I had the owner of the gallery send Amelia a single framed item personally. It wasn't a painting. It was a photograph. A picture of the two of us, taken on a summer day at the lake, years before the world came crashing down. On the back, in my handwriting, were the lines of a poem I had written for her, a poem she thought was lost forever. I watched from the shadows as she unwrapped it. I saw the blood drain from her face, her hand tremble as she touched the lines of my forgotten words. I saw the dawning confusion, the fear, and then a glimmer of something else, a glimmer of doubt. The ghost of Liam had just whispered her name. The final part of my plan was the most personal, the most brutal. It was aimed at the very heart of the lie upon which my brother's kingdom was built. The story of my death. I found him, the man who was with Ethan that night, a man named Murphy, with a rap sheet longer than my arm and a conscience that could be bought for the right price. He was the one who had corroborated Ethan's story, who told the police that I was the one driving the car that killed a pedestrian, the lie that sent me to prison and set Ethan free. Murphy was now a bouncer at a seedy bar on the outskirts of town. His dreams of a big payday from Ethan long since faded. A bottle of cheap whiskey and the promise of a sum that was a fortune to him loosened his tongue. He told me everything. How Ethan, drunk and high on cocaine, had been behind the wheel, how he had panicked, how he had called me, his older brother, his protector, to come and fix it, and how I, blinded by a love that was now my greatest regret, had agreed. I recorded everything, every slurred word, every damning admission. Murphy, in his drunken stupor, had just handed me the key to Ethan's destruction. The stage for the final act was set. E-Corp was hosting its annual gala, a lavish affair that was a pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was to be held in the grand ballroom of a hotel my father and I had built together, a place where we had left our sweat and pride, and which my brother had turned into a symbol of his unearned success. I arrived not as a guest, but as a spirit of vengeance. I used a service entrance, my knowledge of the building's layout a map etched in my memory, guiding me through the labyrinth of corridors. I made my way to the control room, where a single technician was monitoring the event's broadcast. A little social engineering, a fake call from a supervisor about a gas leak on a lower level that required his immediate attention, and the room was mine. Ethan took the stage to thunderous applause. He was in his element, a king addressing his subjects. He spoke of legacy, of family, of building the future, my future. Then he started a video tribute, a glossy, self-congratulatory montage of his achievements. But that's not what the assembled crowd saw. Instead, the screens flickered to life with a grainy, dimly lit image. It was the interior of a seedy bar. And then, the slurred, unmistakable voice of Murphy, confessing his sins and the sins of my brother to the world. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. I watched on the monitor as Ethan's face turned ashen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in real time. The camera panned to Amelia, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and realization. And then I played my final card. The video switched to a new image. It was me, not the ghost of a man who walked out of prison, but who I had become. My face was projected onto the giant screens, 10 feet tall, a specter of vengeance risen from the grave. "Hello, brother," I said, my voice amplified by the ballroom sound system, a death knell for his reign. "Miss me?" I walked onto stage, the crowd parting before me like the Red Sea. The silence was absolute, a living, breathing thing. I stood before my brother, the man who had stolen my life, my love, my very existence. The man who had built his kingdom on my bones. He stared at me, his eyes a whirlwind of fear, disbelief, and a flicker of the old, familiar arrogance. "Liam," he whispered, the name a curse on his lips. "The one and only," I said, my voice as cold as the grave you put me in. "I've come back for what's mine." The fallout was like a hurricane. The flash of cameras, the shouts of reporters. My story, the real story, became a sensation. E-Corp's stock plummeted, its reputation destroyed. Ethan was ruined, an outcast in the city that had once adored him. I met Amelia one last time, in the quiet of the art gallery I had saved for her. She was surrounded by the beauty we had once dreamed together, a ghost of a life that might have been. "I didn't know Liam," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "He told me you died. I mourned you. I know," I said, and in that moment I truly did. I could see the years of quiet desperation in her eyes, the slow extinguishing of her spirit under the weight of Ethan's lie. The anger I had felt for her dissolved, replaced by a dull ache for what could have been. "What will you do now?" she asked. I looked at the paintings, at the frozen moments of beauty and pain. "I don't know," I admitted. "The man I was is gone, and the man I've become, I'm not sure I like him. I had my revenge. I had reclaimed my name. I had razed my brother's kingdom to the ground." But as I walked out of the gallery and into the uncertain light of a new day, a chilling question haunted me. What do you do when the one thing that kept you alive is the very thing that has destroyed you? The Count of Monte Cristo had a treasure, a new life. I was just Liam, a man who had come back from the dead, only to find he'd left his soul behind. The road ahead was a blank canvas, and for the first time in 10 years, I was afraid of the picture I might paint. The price of revenge, I was beginning to understand, wasn't measured in dollars or power, but in the currency of the soul, and I was bankrupt. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left, and thank you for watching.